This is The Strange Recital, a podcast about fiction which questions the nature of reality. More than 30 years ago occurred the first of the series of remarkable events I am about to relate. The exact date I cannot recall, but it was in November, and to those familiar with November weather in the Ohio Valley, it is hardly necessary to state that the month is one of possibilities. That is to say, it is liable to bring every variety of weather, from the delicious, dreamy Indian summer days that linger late in the fall, to a combination of rain, hail, snow, sleet. In short, atmospheric conditions sufficiently aggravating to develop a suicidal mania in anyone the least susceptible to such influences. While the general character of the month is much the same the country over, showing dull gray tones of sky, abundant rains that penetrate man as they do the earth, cold shifting winds that search the very marrow, it is always safe to count more or less upon the probability of the unexpected throughout the month. The particular day which ushered in the event about to be chronicled was one of those possible heterogeneous days presenting a combination of sunshine, shower, and snow, with winds that rang all the changes from balmy to blustery, a morning air of caloric and an evening of numbing cold. The early morning started fair and sunny. Later came light showers suddenly switched by shifting winds into blinding sleet, until the middle of the afternoon found the four winds and all the elements commingled in one wild orgy with clashing and roaring as of a great organ with all the stops out, and all the storm fiends dancing over the keyboards. Nightfall brought some semblance of order to the sounding chaos, but still kept up the wild music of a typical November day with every accompaniment of bleakness, gloom, and desolation. Thousands of chimneys, exhaling murky clouds of bituminous soot all day, had covered the city with the proverbial pall which the winds in their sport had shifted hither and yon, but as, thoroughly tired out, they subsided into silence, the smoky mesh suddenly settled over the houses and into the streets, taking possession of the city and contributing to the melancholy wretchedness of such of the inhabitants as had to be out of doors. Through this smoke the red sun, when visible, had dragged his downward course in manifest discouragement, and the hastening twilight soon gave place to the blackness of darkness. Night reigned supreme. 30 years ago, electric lighting was not in vogue, and the system of street lamps was far less complete than at present, although the gas burned in them may not have been any worse. The lamps were much fewer and farther between, and the light which they emitted had a feeble, sickly aspect and did not reach any distance into the moist and murky atmosphere, and so the night was dismal enough, and the few people upon the street were visible only as they passed directly beneath the lamps, or in front of lighted windows, seeming at other times like moving shadows against a black ground. As I am like to be conspicuous in these pages, it may be proper to say that I am very susceptible to atmospheric influences. I figure among my friends as a man of quiet disposition, but I am at times morose, although I endeavor to conceal this fact from others. My nervous system is a sensitive weather glass. Sometimes I fancy that I must have been born under the planet Saturn, for I find myself unpleasantly influenced by moods ascribed to that depressing planet, more especially in its disagreeable phases, for I regret to state that I do not find corresponding elation as I should in its brighter aspects. I have an especial dislike for wintry weather, a dislike which I find growing with my years, until it has developed almost into positive antipathy and dread. On the day I have described, my moods had varied with the weather. The fitfulness of the winds had found its way into my feelings, and the somber tone of the clouds into my meditations. I was restless as the elements, and a deep sense of dissatisfaction with myself and everything else possessed me. I could not content myself in any place or position. Reading was distasteful, writing equally so. but it occurred to me that a brisk walk for a few blocks might afford relief. Muffling myself up in my overcoat and fur cap, I took the street, only to find the air gusty and raw, and I gave up in still greater disgust, and returning home after drawing the curtains and locking the doors, planted myself in front of a glowing grate fire, firmly resolved to rid myself of myself by resorting to the oblivion of thought, reverie, or dream. To sleep was impossible, and I sat moodily in an easy-chair, noting the quarter and half-hour strokes as they were chimed out sweetly from the spire of St. Peter's Cathedral a few blocks away. 9 o'clock passed with its silver-voiced song of Home Sweet Home. 10, and then 11 strokes of the ponderous bell which noted the hours roused me to a strenuous effort to shake off the feelings of despondency, unrest, and turbulence that all combined to produce a state of mental and physical misery now insufferable. Rising suddenly from my chair, without a conscious effort, I walked mechanically to a bookcase, seized a volume at random, reseated myself before the fire, and opened the book. It proved to be an odd, neglected volume, Riley's Dictionary of Latin Quotations. At the moment there flashed upon me a conscious duality of existence. Had the old book some mesmeric power? I seemed to myself two persons, and I quickly said aloud, as if addressing my double, "If I cannot quiet you, turbulent spirit, I can at least adapt myself to your condition. I will read this book haphazard from bottom to top, or backward if necessary, and if this does not change the subject often enough, I will try Noah Webster." Opening the book mechanically at page 297, I glanced at the bottom line and read, "Nunquam minus solus quam cum solus." Never less alone than when alone. These words arrested my thoughts at once, as by a singular chance they seemed to fit my mood. Was it or was it not some conscious invisible intelligence that caused me to select that page and brought the apothegm to my notice? Again, like a flash, came the consciousness of duality, and I began to argue with my other self. "This is arrant nonsense," I cried aloud, even though Cicero did say it, and it is on a par with many other delusive maxims that have for so many years embittered the existence of our modern youth by misleading thought. Do you know, Mr. Cicero, that this statement is not sound? That it is unworthy of the position you occupy in history as a thinker and philosopher? That it is a contradiction in itself? For if a man is alone, he is alone, and that settles it. I mused in this vein a few moments, and then resumed aloud. It won't do. If one is alone, the word is absolute. He is single, isolated. In short, alone, and there can by no manner of possibility be anyone else present. Take myself, for instance. I am the sole occupant of this apartment. I am alone, and yet you say in so many words that I was never less alone than at this instant. It was not without some misgiving that I uttered these words, for the strange consciousness of my own duality constantly grew stronger, and I could not shake off the reflection that even now there were two of myself in the room, and that I was not so much alone as I endeavored to convince myself. This feeling oppressed me like an incubus. I must throw it off, and rising, I tossed the book upon the table, exclaiming, "What folly! I am alone. Positively there is no other living thing, visible or invisible, in the room." I hesitated as I spoke, for the strange, undefined sensation that I was not alone had become almost a conviction. But the sound of my voice encouraged me, and I determined to discuss the subject, and I remarked in a full, strong voice, "I am surely alone. I know I am. Why, I will wager everything I possess, even to my soul, that I am alone." I stood facing the smoldering embers of the fire which I had neglected to replenish, uttering these words to settle the controversy for good and all with one person of my dual self. But the other ego seemed to dissent violently, when a soft, clear voice claimed my ear. "You have lost your wager. You are not alone." I turned instantly towards the direction of the sound, and to my amazement saw a white-haired man seated on the opposite side of the room, gazing at me with the utmost composure. I am not a coward, nor a believer in ghosts or illusions, and yet that sight froze me where I stood. It had no supernatural appearance. On the contrary, was a plain, ordinary, flesh-and-blood man. But the weather, the experiences of the day, the weird, inclement night, had all conspired to strain my nerves to the highest point of tension, and I trembled from head to foot. Noting this, the stranger said pleasantly, "Quiet yourself, my dear sir. You have nothing to fear. Be seated." I obeyed mechanically, and regaining in a few moments some semblance of composure, took a mental inventory of my visitor. Who is he? What is he? How did he enter without my notice, and why? What is his business? Were all questions that flashed into my mind in quick succession, and quickly flashed out unanswered. The stranger sat eyeing me composedly, even pleasantly, as if waiting for me to reach some conclusion regarding himself. At last I surmised, he is a maniac who has found his way here by methods peculiar to the insane, and my personal safety demands that I use him discreetly. "Very good," he remarked, as though reading my thoughts. "As well think that as anything else. But why are you here? What is your business?" I asked. "You have made and lost a wager," he said. "You have committed an act of folly in making positive statements regarding a matter about which you know nothing. A very common failing, by the way, on the part of mankind, and concerning which I wish first to set you straight." The ironical coolness with which he said this provoked me, and I hastily rejoined, "You are impertinent. I must ask you to leave my house at once." "Very well," he answered, "but if you insist upon this, I shall, on behalf of Cicero, claim the stake of your voluntary wager, which means that I must first, by natural though violent means, release your soul from your body." So saying, he arose, drew from an inner pocket a long, keen knife, the blade of which quiveringly glistened as he laid it upon the table. Moving his chair so as to be within easy reach of the gleaming weapon, he sat down and again regarded me with the same quiet composure I had noted, and which was fast dispelling my first impression concerning his sanity. I was not prepared for his strange action. In truth, I was not prepared for anything. My mind was confused concerning the whole night's doings, and I was unable to reason clearly or consecutively, or even to satisfy myself what I did think, if indeed I thought at all. The sensation of fear, however, was fast leaving me. There was something reassuring in my unbidden guest's perfect ease of manner, and the mild though searching gaze of his eyes, which were wonderful in their expression. I began to observe his personal characteristics, which impressed me favorably, and yet were extraordinary. He was nearly 6 feet tall and perfectly straight, well proportioned, with no tendency either to leanness or obesity. But his head was an object from which I could not take my eyes. Such a head surely I had never before seen on mortal shoulders. The chin, as seen through his silver beard, was rounded and well developed, the mouth straight, with pleasant lines about it, the jaws square and like the mouth indicating decision, the eyes deep set and arched with heavy eyebrows, and the whole surmounted by a forehead so vast, so high that it was almost a deformity, and yet it did not impress me unpleasantly. It was the forehead of a scholar, a profound thinker, a deep student. The nose was inclined to aquiline and quite large. The contour of the head and face impressed me as indicating a man of learning, one who had given a lifetime to experimental as well as speculative thought. His voice was mellow, clear, and distinct, always pleasantly modulated and soft, never loud nor unpleasant in the least degree. One remarkable feature I must not fail to mention: his hair. This, while thin and scant upon the top of his head, was long and reached to his shoulders. His beard was of unusual length, descending almost to his waist. His hair, eyebrows, and beard were all of singular whiteness and purity, almost transparent, a silvery whiteness that seemed an aureolar sheen in the glare of the gaslight. What struck me as particularly remarkable was that his skin looked as soft and smooth as that of a child. There was not a blemish in it. His age was a puzzle none could guess. Stripped of his hair or the color of it changed, he might be 25. Given a few wrinkles, he might be 90. Taken altogether, I had never seen his like, nor anything approaching his like, and for an instant there was a faint suggestion to my mind that he was not of this earth, but belonged to some other planet. I now fancy he must have read my impressions of him as these ideas shaped themselves in my brain, and that he was quietly waiting for me to regain a degree of self-possession that would allow him to disclose the purpose of his visit. He was first to break the silence. "I see that you are not disposed to pay your wager any more than I am to collect it, so we will not discuss that. I admit that my introduction tonight was abrupt, but you cannot deny that you challenged me to appear. I was not clear upon the point and said so. Your memory is at fault," he continued, "if you cannot recall your experiences of the day just past. Did you not attempt to interest yourself in modern book lore, to fix your mind in turn upon history, chemistry, botany, poetry, and general literature? And all these failing, did you not deliberately challenge Cicero to a practical demonstration of an old apothegm of his that has survived for centuries? And of your own free will, did not you make a wager that as an admirer of Cicero's I am free to accept? To all this I could but silently assent. Very good, then. We will not pursue this subject further, as it is not relevant to my purpose, which is to acquaint you with a narrative of unusual interest, upon certain conditions, with which, if you comply, you will not only serve yourself, but me as well." "Please name the conditions," I said. "They are simple enough," he answered. "The narrative I speak of is in manuscript. I will produce it in the near future, and my design is to read it aloud to you, or to allow you to read it to me, as you may select. Further, my wish is that during the reading you shall interpose any objection or question that you deem proper. This reading will occupy many evenings, and I shall of necessity be with you often. When the reading is concluded, we will seal the package securely, and I shall leave you forever. You will then deposit the manuscript in some safe place, and let it remain for 30 years. When this period has elapsed, I wish you to publish this history to the world." "Your conditions seem easy," I said after a few seconds' pause. "They are certainly very simple. Do you accept?" I hesitated, for the prospect of giving myself up to a succession of interviews with this extraordinary and mysterious personage seemed to require consideration. He evidently divined my thoughts, for, rising from his chair, he said abruptly, "Let me have your answer now." I debated the matter no further, but answered, "I accept, conditionally." "Name your conditions," the guest replied. "I will either publish the work, or induce some other man to do so." "Good," he said. "I will see you again." With a polite bow, and turning to the door which I had previously locked, he opened it softly, and with a quiet "good night," disappeared in the hallway.
That was Etidorhpa, written by John Uri Lloyd and read by Brent Robison. This is an excerpt from the novel Etidorhpa by John Uri Lloyd, published privately, or independently as we might now say, in 1895. Beyond this excerpt we just heard, I haven't yet read this book. In fact, I was completely unaware of it until you suggested it for this episode. It seems it was a very popular book in its day. What led you to choose it?
My wife discovered it by chance in a YouTube rabbit hole about Manly P. Hall, who gave a lecture on it in 1955. I've only read the very beginning, but I'm interested in this book on several levels. First, the framing devices used by the author are similar to what both you and I have explored in our recent books, a metafictional questioning of the nature of authorship. In my novel, A Book with No Author, I start by claiming I'm not the author of the book within the book, and both the inner and outer books contain stories that seem to have no traceable author. And in your new book, Fabian, a Cubist biography, eminently forthcoming, I might add, you reject standard fiction technique in favor of astrology and the curious idea of characters created by other characters. So, who's really the author?
Well, the author in this case was John Uri Lloyd, who was also a prominent and influential pharmacist in northern Kentucky and Cincinnati, Ohio, around the turn of the 20th century. He was a leader of the eclectic medicine movement, which emphasized botanical remedies along with physical therapy practices. The pharmacy business he started with his brothers, Lloyd's, was later purchased by a German company, which was itself purchased by Eli Lilly. So it's a case of small pharma becoming big pharma. But I'm digressing needlessly.
Yes. He wrote a number of scientific books, but also several novels. His first and most popular one had the long title, Etidorhpa, or The End of the Earth, The Strange History of a Mysterious Being and the Account of a Remarkable Journey. You may have noticed that the title is Aphrodite spelled backwards.
Mm-hmm.
The book was first published in 1895 and went on to have 18 editions in 7 languages. It's considered part of the Hollow Earth subgenre of science fiction, of which Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth might be a prototype.
Though I'm familiar with Verne's book, I never associated it with any particular genre, and certainly not the Hollow Earth subgenre of science fiction, which is yet another thing I hadn't heard about. But the idea interests me. Apparently, the Hollow Earth was a scientific hypothesis which proposed that the Earth is entirely hollow or contains a substantial interior space. Edmund Halley, after whom the comet is named, was a proponent of the idea in the late 17th century, but it was disproven in the 18th century, and it seems the idea was resurrected in the 19th century as a literary genre.
Yeah. Before and since, there have been many fictional depictions, probably more accurately called subterranean fiction. As a kid, I read Journey to the Center of the Earth and loved it, an adventure into a prehistoric world down underground. So I'm interested to see what Lloyd does with it. I know he introduces a strange, faceless humanoid being that becomes the narrator's guide into the underworld, and I suspect his story is more allegorical, sort of Orphic or Dante-esque, with a final message about love being the soul of the world.
Hence the name Aphrodite written in reverse, I suppose. By the way, I read that the book was so popular that many girls born at the time were given the name Etidorhpa. I wonder how they felt about that later in life.
Yeah. And I wonder what it was about this novel that made it so popular for some years around the turn of the century. I don't have an answer. It's impossible to really know the significant cultural differences between America of that time and this, and why it didn't retain the same level of popularity as its contemporaries, the work of Henry James, H.G. Wells, Stephen Crane, others.
You were talking earlier about the metafictional quality of the book, and I dragged you off topic. Let's get back to that.
Well, we just heard most of Chapter 1 of Etidorhpa, but even before that, the title page says all this. Etidorhpa, or The End of the Earth, the strange history of a mysterious being and the account of a remarkable journey as communicated in manuscript to Llewellyn Drury, who promised to print the same but finally evaded the responsibility, which was assumed by John Uri Lloyd. Quite a title page.
Yeah.
Then, in the preface, Lloyd says that exactly how he got the manuscript of the book, whether directly from Drury or not, is immaterial, but it has been in his possession for 7 years as of 1894. So Lloyd slyly denies his authorship and sets up the possibility that someone named Drury could have invented this story. To emphasize this, before Chapter 1, there's a prologue written by Drury. But then, of course, Drury's subsequent narration tells us that the book within the book all came from a mysterious old guy who appears as if by magic. The main story is his story.
It all seems like a lot of effort just to pretend you're not the author.
It certainly does. But this kind of gimmick has a respectable history. In Lolita, for example, Nabokov opens with a foreword supposedly written by John Ray Jr., Ph.D., who claims that the book to follow was given to him as a manuscript written by its narrator, Humbert Humbert. He does a similar maneuver in the novel Pale Fire, in which a foreword by Charles Kinbote tells us that he's going to go through an analysis of a 999-line poem by John Shade. Hermann Hesse opens his novel Steppenwolf with a preface claiming that the book is actually the writings of a man he met named Harry Haller. Joseph Conrad framed Heart of Darkness with an atmospheric opening scene by a nameless first-person narrator in which a sailor named Marlowe slowly begins telling a story to his shipmates, and then the rest of the novella is his story, every paragraph except the very last one, starting with a quotation mark.
So why do you think it is that some writers do this kind of thing?
Well, I think there are several reasons. First, we're apparently fascinated by storytelling as a concept, not just an activity. Narrative seems to be one of the most intrinsic parts of human nature, one of the ways we create reality, you might say.
Yeah.
So as authors, we enjoy pointing to the fact that a story is being crafted more than just events being related. And one way to do that is this metafictional gimmickry, showing authorship by denying authorship.
Also, perhaps, by claiming someone else has written what you've written is a way of justifying it, imbuing it with a sort of stylized reality, a fictional veracity, you might say.
Yeah, that may be so, but I think it might also be a way to acknowledge the mystery at the source of our made-up stories. Where do these characters and plot lines come from? Certainly not from mere brain tissue with a flicker of electricity running through it. Is there something like a morphic field, as Rupert Sheldrake proposes, a sort of shared telepathy, or maybe an Akashic record? For me, at least, it feels honest to acknowledge that, who knows, I may be just a receiver of sorts, that these creations may be coming through me, not from me.
Or they may be coming at you.
Yeah. But then, of course, taking Nabokov's lead, we're just having fun. If stories are essential to human nature, so are games. We're playing literary games, setting up puzzles for our own enjoyment and challenge, and hoping the reader will participate.
As Lloyd was a pharmacist, there have been rumors that he dosed himself up on something, and that's why he wrote such a strange book.
Yeah, that would be interesting to know more about. He was into botanical remedies, so he may have been exploring hallucinogenic plant medicines. He would have known about Native American shamanism and may have read the drug-influenced work of De Quincey, Coleridge, Poe. But of course, the human imagination can do amazing tricks without any outside help.
Yes, indeed. Now, one more thing before we go. If Etidorhpa is an allegorical story, who's the old guy? Is it you? Or is it me? This is The Strange Recital, on the web at thestrangerecital.com. The music on this episode was Schmetterling by Kevin MacLeod. This is episode 25011.